Hello? Hello? Good afternoon, everyone. One more time. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Barry. Welcome, everyone, to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition Housing Forum 2024, an unwavering path forward to housing justice. My name is Dora Leon Gallo. Yes. There's a lot more clapping you're going to do later. An unwavering path forward to housing justice. My name is Dora Leon Gallo, and I am the chair of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition's Board of Directors. I'm pleased to welcome you all to this year's forum. The NLIHC team has put together an incredible, engaging event this year with an exciting roster of speakers, a wide range of plenary and breakout sessions, and not just one, but two keynote presentations. Housing Policy Forum 2024 is particularly special this year because 2024 marks NLIHC's 50th anniversary as an advocacy organization. Yay! See, more clapping. And over the next few days, we'll be commemorating our 50-year anniversary by celebrating the coalition's history, partners, and achievements in advocating for housing justice. Before we go any further, I'd like us to begin today's program by acknowledging that this hotel sits on the unceded homelands of the Nitoshkang and Acostan and Piscataway people, and by recognizing that the genocide of Native people is a long legacy of displacement and injustice that continues to impact housing stability today. At the Coalition, we plan to go beyond a land acknowledgement and, as a form of reparations, make a meaningful donation to the Native American Rights Fund, a Native-founded and Native-led organization that fights to protect Native American rights, resources, and lifeways through litigation, legal advocacy, and legal expertise. For 50 years now, yes. For 50 years now, the Coalition has been leading the charge forward on the path to housing justice. Since being founded in 1974 by Cushing Dobert, our organization has been driven by a single mission to achieve racially and socially equitable public policy that ensures that people with the lowest income have quality homes that are accessible and affordable in communities of their choice. As everyone in this audience knows, that path has never been smooth. Over the last 50 years, we've faced significant obstacles in our work to end housing poverty and homelessness in the United States, and we continue to face serious challenges today. Yet what has never changed is our unwavering resolve to keep fighting until we achieve housing justice for the lowest income people. It's this resolve that has allowed us to accomplish a great deal over the last 50 years, which you'll soon hear more about. None of these achievements would ever have been possible without the unwavering commitment of advocates like all of you in this room today. We are so grateful for all you have done, all you continue to do, to ensure that housing justice for those with the lowest incomes and for people experiencing homelessness. In guiding efforts to achieve our goals are the members of NLIHC's Board of Directors, whom I'd like to recognize now. The current board members are myself, Dora Leon Gallo, Chair, Ann Mavity, First Vice Chair, Nan Roman, Second Vice Chair, Moises Loza, Treasurer, Erin Gordenstein, Secretary, Bambi Hayes-Brown, At-Large Executive Committee Member, Zella Knight, At-Large Executive Committee Member, Kathy Aldman, Derek Belgard, Russell Bennett, Stacy Berg, Diana Blackwell, Andrew Bradley, Lorraine Brown, Ali Kennington, Geraldine Collins, Lisa D'Souza, Catherine Monet, Chriselle Pillay, Hassan Rashid, Shalonda Rivers, Megan Sandel, Marie-Claire Tran Leung, Sharon Vogel, and Mindy Woods. Yes. It has been a privilege and a pleasure to lead such a talented, dedicated, inspiring group in my role as board chair. I also like to extend my deepest thanks to those who are ending their terms of service on the NLIC board over the last year. They include Dara Baldwin, Colleen Eckerhart, and Eric Price. Everybody, the coalition is very grateful that they served. And I want to let you know that we're always accepting applications and nominations for new members of our board. Here's the process. We have 6 low-income members, 6 representatives of national organizations, 6 representatives from NLHC state partners, and up to 7 unrestricted at-large members. And more of this information in a nomination form is in your packet. In addition to members of the Coalition's board, I'd like to recognize the Coalition's major sponsors. Without their generous support, the Coalition's effort to achieve housing justice would not be possible, so thank you for all of our funders. Thank you. Likewise, the Coalition has special members, and I'd like to acknowledge them here. Our special members have a special stake in our work, and they have a seat at our policy table. We're grateful for their contributions to our advocacy efforts. And one final note, yes, thank them. And one final note, as we launch our forum today, I want to share that we've made a number of improvements to this year's forum, thanks to our Coalition's terrific events planning team. One big improvement that we've made is to use a new app, Engage Fully, to gather questions from the audience members during the plenary sessions. At the same time, we recognize that not everyone uses an app, including yours truly. So audience members can also ask questions by visiting a table in the back of the room where you can write your questions on index cards and submit them to Coalition staff. And I think someone's waving in the back. Even with the new app, we'll only have a limited amount of time for questions, so we won't be able to get to every question, but we would like to hear your questions, so please do submit them. And now, I'm pleased to introduce you to our President and CEO, Diane Yantel, who will speak about affordable housing policy developments over the last year and prospects for 2024.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome. It's so wonderful to see you all here as we kick off both NLHC's Policy Forum and our 50th anniversary year celebrations. Welcome. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm delighted to see you and to be with you throughout the week and to look out into this audience and see so many longtime partners, familiar faces and friends, and to see so many new faces as well. And I wonder how many of you are here at an NLHC Policy Forum in person for the first time? Raise your hand. Wow, welcome. That's fantastic. And how many of you are back and have been here before? Well, welcome back. Thanks for being here. It's wonderful to be together as we kick off this year recognizing and celebrating NLHC's 50 years of advocacy for housing justice. NLHC has a long and storied history. Yes. And it dates back to 1974 when the late Cushing Dolbear called together several national organizations to respond to major changes to federal low-income housing programs proposed by the Nixon administration. Since then, we've achieved so much together. We have been influential in every major piece of federal legislation related to affordable housing over the last 5 decades, from helping to create the Section 8 voucher program in the 70s, to working with partners, to enact the first ever federal legislative response to homelessness and the low-income housing tax credit program in the 80s, to enacting the National Affordable Housing Act and creating the Home Investment Partnership Program in the 90s, to creating disaster housing recovery programs and establishing the Protecting Renters in Foreclosure Act in the wake of the Great Recession, to creating the National Housing Trust Fund, to defeating cuts and winning historic increases in HUD appropriations and an expansion of rental assistance over the last decade. And we should measure our success and our achievements not only by what we advanced, but also by what we've prevented. NLIHC has defeated decades of attempts to create harmful and punitive new hurdles for low-income people to jump over before getting assistance. We've defeated efforts to add work requirements, time limits, sobriety requirements to federal housing programs. We've defeated again and again attempts to gut or eliminate crucial housing programs. And we defeated, in the last administration, cynical and cruel efforts to hike rents, separate families in subsidized housing, to evict immigrants, and to reverse progress on fair housing. There can be no doubt that over the last 50 years, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition has had a tremendously positive impact on the lives of millions of people across America. And we are so impactful because of who we are, because of who makes up the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. And first, always, there are those that came before us. And I'm delighted to have with us here in this room, throughout the forum, throughout the week, many of those who worked to create and build NLIHC through the decades. Together, they form NLIHC's Leadership Council, which are our former CEOs and board chairs. And I'd like to ask those who are here in the room now to please stand and be recognized. Thank you. We stand on your shoulders. Thank you. And we are impactful because of who we are, because of who makes up the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. And we are an organization, yes, we're an organization made up of incredibly skilled and talented and determined staff. And we're so much more as well. We are a broad and powerful network of people and organizations across the country who together fight and win for housing justice. You are the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. And I'd like to ask how many of you here today are impacted people, tenant leaders, people experiencing or who have experienced homelessness. Stand up if you're able, or raise your hand, please. People who have lived in subsidized housing. You are the National Low-Income, I know there's a lot of you here. You are the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. And how many of you here today are national partners or state and tribal partners? Again, stand if you're able, or raise your hands, please. You are the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. And by the way, we have partners here in this room today from all across the country. We have housing advocates representing our state and tribal partners network from 40 states in the room here today. So it's all of you, it's all of us that makes us powerful. And our power was clear during the pandemic, when together we achieved protections and resources for renters and unhoused people on a scale unlike any in our lifetimes. Protections like the eviction moratorium, resources like emergency rental assistance, emergency housing vouchers, and more. And even beyond housing assistance, resources that our partners fought for, like expanded child tax credits. Together, it had an extraordinary effect that was immediately and easily felt and measured. And this work, this expression of our collective power, saved lives. It cut eviction filings in half to their lowest level on record, got thousands of unhoused and unsheltered people to safety, cut child poverty in half. And that moment, that work showed us with certainty what so many of us have said for years, that the only thing we lack to end homelessness and achieve housing justice is the political will to do it, right? And during the pandemic, Congress showed clearly that when policymakers feel enough pressure, when they see enough urgency, when they have the will, they can absolutely act to get and keep people throughout the country stably housed. And the political will was so strong in that moment, the need so obvious and great, the power of proven solutions so clear, that it continued beyond the pandemic era programs. And we were able to get closer than we've ever been in history to making major investments on the scale needed for long-term solutions to end the housing crisis through the House-passed Build Back Better Act. But then, a new sense of normal returned after the pandemic, and that political will disappeared. The Build Back Better Act died in the Senate. Pandemic programs expired. Poverty rebounded. Evictions climbed. Rents soared. Homelessness increased. And this is the new normal that too many policymakers and too many people are willing to accept. But that moment of political will, when government used its immense power and immense resources and shifted them towards helping people survive and thrive, that was our proof. And to see it, to experience it, to achieve it in our lifetimes, that's what must drive us to achieve it again. We know it's possible. And to achieve this time permanent, holistic solutions, long-term solutions to the crisis. So the question, of course, is how? And the answer is in the experience. During the pandemic, together, we built the will. We created the pressure. We mobilized the country. But ultimately, we didn't have the power needed to sustain that political will to achieve real long-term solutions. So the answer to how is we keep going, building more power, creating deeper, new partnerships and movements, building evidence, putting continued pressure on policymakers to act, and achieving wins, and with them, momentum. And at a time when affordable housing has become a top priority issue on the national agenda and in the national discourse, we have an incredible opportunity and urgency to act. So we keep going, we keep building power, building will, until we accomplish our mission of achieving housing justice once and for all. And that's exactly what we're doing together and what we've been doing during and since the pandemic. And one of the clearest indications of our growing power is seen just in the tremendous accomplishments that just the people here in this room have achieved over the last year in your communities. The work of our partners, just those here in the room today, achieved collectively over $10 billion in new state and local resources for affordable housing. Our partners in Michigan, where's Michigan? Yes, our partners in Michigan secured over $1 billion in new money for affordable housing. Where's Alabama? Our partners at the Low-Income Housing, they're in the back. Our partners at the Low-Income Housing Coalition of Alabama rallied advocates to get the state to allocate $25 million to Alabama's State Housing Trust Fund. Our partners in Oregon and Illinois each rallied lawmakers to achieve $200 million in new funding for affordable housing. The Maine Quality Housing Coalition, where are you? We've got a big contingent from Maine right here. They worked with the governor's office and her staff to make available the first ever funding specifically for affordable rental housing and supportive housing, and to create a statewide Housing First program. And Minnesota Housing Partnership. Where's Minnesota? Here we are. Successfully advocated for policymakers to enact $1.3 billion in a housing omnibus bill, marking the state's largest investment in affordable housing in history. It's been extraordinary work, and that's not all. The number of new tenant and other protections that you all have succeeded in enacting in communities around the country clearly shows our growing power and our momentum. In the last 3 years alone, you and others have advanced and implemented nearly 300 new state and local tenant protections, shifting power in our housing system back to where it belongs, with renters and people experiencing homelessness. 300 tenant protections, that's incredible work. I think you should give yourselves a round of applause. Our partners in, and raise your hand if you're from these places, our partners in Connecticut, Maryland, Minnesota, Delaware, and Washington, and in Denver, Detroit, Louisville, New Orleans, Seattle, and St. Louis, keep your hands up, were instrumental in efforts to pass right to counsel legislation within their jurisdictions. Our partners in Rhode Island and Connecticut passed laws banning rental application fees, creating a statewide rental registry, and sealing eviction records. In Colorado, where's Colorado? In Colorado, they created new source of income protections and limited junk fees. Our partners at Texas Housers, where's Texas? Helped enact a tenant's bill of rights in San Antonio, and our partners in Washington did the same in Tacoma. And back to Minnesota, our Minnesota Housing Partnership won the passage of a comprehensive tenants' rights package that strengthens eviction protections, landlord accountability, and health and safety requirements. And New Jersey, where's New Jersey? New Jersey's always the loudest. New Jersey, led by the Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey, passed the Community Wealth Preservation Program to give families and nonprofits the right of first refusal to purchase foreclosed homes and keep generational wealth. And our partners at the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance, working alongside tenant leaders in the state's Resident Action Project, led a tremendous and powerful campaign for statewide rent stabilization that, although it was so unfortunately blocked just before passage, moves them that much closer to the finish line in the next legislative session when they will win. Incredible work. You'll hear more during this conference about some of these and other incredible wins to advance tenant protections from the organizers and the impacted people who made it happen. And this state and local work, especially on tenant protections, is clearly building political will for federal action. Because of this momentum, this incredible organizing, this pressure for action, the White House has taken unprecedented steps to advance renter protections. During his presidential campaign, after urging from all of us and others, President Biden committed to taking federal action to advance tenant protections. And NLHC has visited the White House many times since he's been in office to talk about the need for bold action to protect tenants, including a little over a year ago when NLHC's tenant leader cohort went to the White House to talk directly to senior leadership about needed renter protections. And soon after their meeting with impacted people, the White House, for the first time ever, the first time any White House in history ever, announced that the country needs a renter's bill of rights. And we couldn't agree more. And then just this month, in his State of the Union address, President Biden said he would crack down on landlords that price fix and drive up rents. This is historic, a president in the State of the Union speech talking about unfair and unlawful rent hikes. It's the first time in decades since the Great Depression that the federal government is acknowledging that there is an important federal role in preventing rent gouging. And it would not have happened without the power you've built, without all of your organizing and urging and insisting that it did. And we're following up on these announcements by the White House by working with partners at People's Action, the Homes Guarantee, the National Housing Law Project, and others to get over 3,500 public comments submitted to FHFA for their comment period on renter rights. And we've been working with these same partners to create a comprehensive Renters' Bill of Rights, written with direct input from tenant leaders, tenant organizers, people with lived experience, and their allies. And our goal is to unite the movement around key tenant protections and advance them at the federal level, even as we continue to work with you to continue advancing protections at the state and local level. And you'll hear more about this work as well in the, You'll hear more about all of this work too in the coming days. But we believe so deeply in the importance of this work that NLHC is expanding our team, including creating a new team dedicated to supporting state and local innovation to help advance this work. And the power that we're building together, the progress that we're making on tenant protections and beyond, is a direct result of our and your engaging with, elevating, and centering the leadership of impacted people in this work. At NLHC, a key part of our work on racial justice and inclusion is centering and amplifying the power, the voices of impacted people. And from the time Cushing Dolbear founded NLHC 50 years ago, we've ensured that impacted people were always at the highest level of leadership in our organization, on our board of directors. And I'd love to ask for our resident caucus of NLHC's board of directors to stand if you're able or raise your hands to be recognized. And we've partnered and connected with public housing residents, voucher holders, other impacted leaders in different ways for decades. And in the last 2 years, we took that work further and deeper, creating NLHC's tenant leader cohort, the Collective. And this is our first, and here again, I'd like to ask, raise your hands or stand if you're able, NLHC's first tenant leader cohort. Those of you who are here to be recognized. And if you can, stay standing, keep your hands raised, but I'll ask the same of our second tenant and current tenant leader cohort to please raise your hands, stand if you're able, throughout the room. Thank you. Thank you for your tremendous leadership, for your work and dedication, and thank you for your partnership with NLHC. And we're committed to continuing to work with these and so many other tenant leaders here today and beyond to do more. So here too, NLHC is expanding our teams as part of our Ideas initiative. We've expanded our team on racial equity, created a new position on inclusive community engagement, and we've hired NLHC's first ever tenant leader fellow, who I just saw over here, I think. There's Dee Ross, our tenant leader fellow. And we're also expanding our resources and our commitment to build more tenant power and ultimately more political will. We build power too through the national campaigns that we're leading. Our Housed campaign mobilizes the housing field, impacted people, organizers, providers, local, state, national advocates. Our Opportunity Starts at Home campaign effectively mobilizes the fields of healthcare, anti-poverty, anti-hunger, civil rights, education, and more. And here too, we had real challenges and advancements over the last year. Last year at this time, at this forum, we talked about how House Republicans were threatening to default on our nation's debt as leverage to demand dramatic cuts to all domestic programs, including those for housing and homelessness. And in fact, some House Republicans proposed cutting HUD's budget by 43% and proposed eliminating the Section 8 voucher program. Together, our House Genosa campaigns mobilized our incredible network of partners throughout the countries, and we said no. We knew our communities and neighbors can't withstand more cuts to these critical housing programs, and we won. The final FY24 spending bill was just enacted, and we not only prevented cuts to those housing programs that we prioritized, vouchers, public housing, homelessness programs, but we also achieved increased funding for each. Incredibly unlikely, an excellent outcome. We've also built power and partnerships through our disaster housing recovery work. In the last year, In the last year, our Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition of over 900 organizations from around the country built on its past success, fostered new, deep connections with disaster-impacted communities, linked those communities and their advocates with policymakers and advocacy efforts on the national level, and forged historic victories for households with low incomes impacted by disasters. And here, too, we're committed to do more. We're building out our disaster housing team, expanding our work and our partnerships, and making a deeper commitment to build political will and evidence with what we're now calling our disaster housing recovery, resilience, and research work. And you'll hear more about this throughout the conference as well. We're also building power through fighting back against coordinated and well-funded campaigns to criminalize homelessness. As homelessness increases and becomes increasingly visible, there has been a dangerous and growing backlash against proven solutions to ending homelessness and against people experiencing homelessness. And it's gotten so bad that next month, the Supreme Court will hear a case called City of Grants Pass, Oregon versus Johnson that will determine whether cities and localities have free rein to criminalize homelessness. The case is literally about whether a person sleeping on a sidewalk with no other place to stay can be ticketed or arrested for having a pillow to lay their head or a sleeping bag to keep them warm. And the City of Grants Pass, together with a really alarming number of mayors and governors, both Republicans and Democrats, say yes, they should be able to arrest people with no place else to go. And we say no, and we'll be at the Supreme Court on April 22nd, along with our partners at the National Homelessness Law Center, the National Alliance to End Homelessness, the National Coalition for the Homeless, and many others, to say no, and to continue to demand the affordable housing and supportive services that are the real solutions to homelessness. So if you're in DC or you can get to DC, join us that day, and you'll find more information in your packets and at our advocacy center. And many of you are fighting this and winning at the local level. Our partners at the Polk County Housing Trust Fund, the Kansas Statewide Homeless Coalition, and Prosperity Indiana, all here today somewhere, raise your hands, all fought back, each fought back against coordinated and well-funded attempts to criminalize homelessness in their states and won, defeating the Cicero Institute's efforts. And we're grateful for your efforts. Ultimately, and finally, we build political will at the ballot box and through those we elect to office. There's nothing more fundamental to building political power and political will than increasing the voter engagement of impacted people through registering, getting out the vote, and ultimately running for office and winning. Because the power of impacted people in elected office is undeniable. You don't have to convince someone who experienced homelessness to prioritize solutions to homelessness once they're in office. And members of Congress like Representatives Cleaver, Torres, Peterson, Lynch show the power of lived experience in office when they consistently prioritize public housing, more rental assistance, fair housing. And no one shows that power better than Representative Cori Bush. When the eviction moratorium was about to expire without emergency rental assistance having been distributed, nobody had to ask Representative Cori Bush to act. After the House gavelled out of session, she stood up, walked out, and sat down on the steps of the Capitol, and she stayed there until the Biden administration acted. That's the power of lived experience in office. And we'll hear more from Representative Cori Bush in tomorrow's plenary session. So the work of building power fundamentally starts with voter engagement. It starts with voter registration and turnout. It starts with urging people running for office to prioritize housing justice. And these numbers tell the whole story of why. Higher income people, predominantly homeowners, predominantly white, vote at much higher levels than lower income people, predominantly renters, predominantly people of color. And so when we ask ourselves, why do policymakers, if they prioritize housing at all, why do they only prioritize home ownership? Why do they provide massive subsidies through the mortgage interest deduction to homeowners? This is why. And when we ask ourselves, what will it take to get policymakers to prioritize the long-term housing solutions of renters and unhoused people, this is what it will take. Closing this gap is the key to building political will. Now, there's very obvious reasons why these numbers are skewed. The same communities that face the greatest barriers to securing stable, accessible, affordable homes also face the greatest barriers to voting for many reasons, including deliberate voter suppression tactics that disproportionately affect voters of color and with low incomes. But the good news is that this room is filled with people that have the power to break down barriers at the ballot box and build the political will for housing solutions. So at NLIHC, we are also building out an Our Homes, Our Votes team so we can expand this work. And 2024 is obviously a tremendously important election year. The stakes for housing and homelessness are high. So we want to work together to make sure that candidates on both sides of the aisle and at every level of government know that affordable housing is a top priority for voters. We'll try out new tactics. We'll learn from what works in order to do more in the next election. So I also encourage you to visit the Advocacy Center again. There's more information on how you can get involved, and you'll hear more about this in tomorrow's plenary session. So the power that we're building is clear and growing, but we've so much more to do. And as we move into this 2024, our 50th anniversary year, it is a pivotal moment with incredible opportunities and challenges ahead. So we are ready to meet those challenges head on. We'll gather lessons from those who came before us, those who have done this work before for decades. We'll galvanize the energy and the creativity and ideas of new generations that are moved to act for housing justice. We'll build momentum with every win at the local, state, and national level. And we'll continue growing, building power and partnerships, and moving forward into the next 50 years together on an unwavering path to housing justice. So thank you all once again. Thank you so much for being here for this forum, but even more, thank you for your commitment, for your difficult, essential work, and thank you for your partnership. Thank you. Thank you. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Sherilyn Ifill. Sherilyn Ifill is a civil rights lawyer and scholar. From 2013 to 2022, she served as the president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, or LDF, the nation's premier civil rights law organization fighting for racial justice and equality. She is currently a distinguished professor of practice at Harvard Law School, and she serves as Ford Foundation Fellow at the Museum of Modern Art, leading a project focused on exploring the values of the 14th Amendment in artistic expression. Ifill was most recently appointed to be the inaugural Vernon Jordan Endowed Chair in Civil Rights at Howard Law School, where she will launch the 14th Amendment Center for Law and Democracy. And joining Sherilyn for a discussion on racial equity and dismantling our country's history of housing discrimination and racist housing policies is Renee Willis, NLIHC's Senior Vice President of Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I'm delighted to invite them both to the stage now.
You're amongst friends here.
I know. Yeah. It's a great crowd. Okay.
Hello, friends.
Hug.
I appreciate you.
I appreciate you as well. Welcome to the
Thank
coalition.
you.
Welcome to the forum.
Thank you. I'd love to see this packed room.
Yes.
Housing advocates, wonderful.
That's
Are in the house.
Hello.
Yes, and like I said, you're amongst friends, so welcome. It's so great to be in conversation with you today. And I'll if you don't mind, I'm gonna let the audience in on a little secret I shared with Professor Ifill on Friday when we spoke. We met before. We met in Baltimore. We're not gonna say the year, but we met in Baltimore some time ago when Professor Ifill was a professor at the University of Maryland Law School in Baltimore. I was at the Public Justice Center, which is a nonprofit statewide organization, and they do housing policy work. And we met because she was training up a group of, a cadre of law students to fight the good fight. And I just admired this woman back then. I admire her now. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
It's great to be in community with you again.
Absolutely.
So just want to start with the why. Not what brought you here to the forum, but why are you doing this work? Your why in this work?
You know, I always, first of all, thank you all so much for having me. Thank you for all coming, and thank you, Renee, for that lovely introduction and remembrance. I feel like I'm cheating when I answer that question because I don't really recall a time that I didn't want to be doing. I mean, okay, like I did dream of being an actress at one point, you know, but this is what I wanted to do from the time I was a girl, and it's why I went to law school for sure. And I feel eternally privileged and grateful that I've gotten to really live my dream. And I mean that very, very seriously. You know, this is incredibly hard work, but I have never been unhappy in my work. You know, I have always loved what I do. You know, I'm nervous enough to need to know that I'm in the right. And so I like doing work where I know I'm in the right. I love representing the clients that I've represented over the years. I love grappling with the most important issues that I think are germane to whether or not we survive as a democracy, and to feel like I can stand before my community knowing that I've, you know, poured in what I can.
Yeah, I love it. That's beautiful. And I know you've spent, and we said we weren't going to mention years, but you've spent some time representing people in the margins, on the margins.
Yeah.
And just wanted to know, like, what has that experience taught you?
Well, I feel like my clients teach me about America. They help me understand this puzzle, you know, to do civil rights work, to try and grapple with and deconstruct the structure of racial inequality and injustice is a constant learning experience. It's why I'm always so irritated by, decisions of the Supreme Court in which they sound like they kind of know it all and they're explaining to us how things work. Because, to be honest, with the exception of now Justice Jackson, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Justice Sotomayor, from her own lived experience and her time on the board of Latino Justice Pearl Deaf, none of them really have any experience engaged in the representation of people for whom our democracy is not working.
That's right. That's right.
And certainly don't have experience dealing in particular with racial discrimination. So I get annoyed by it because I find the work to be constantly challenging. There is never a time when I don't feel like I am learning something about the puzzle, that something's not unfolding for me that's helping me think through why that strategy probably didn't work, or what's at the root, right, of that struggle or challenge. It is a continuous learning about history. And I think to understand racism requires that you are interested in, not just voting rights, politics, and elections. I've been a voting rights lawyer for most of my career, but I've done many other things as well. But you have to also be interested in and have some knowledge of housing, of employment, of labor economics, of a whole range of things to be able to understand how all the pieces fit together. So the idea that a justice who has no experience in this background would just kind of speak with this authoritative voice as though it all can be just understood, without really a deep sense of engagement and a measure of humility. When the justices blow past the briefs or blow past the record in the case, that's my job. My job and the job of civil rights lawyers is to create a record. We're not just litigating the case, we're also educating the court. Because even if you know about these issues, you don't know how it plays out in Etowah County, Alabama, right? That's the job of the litigants, to be able to bring that to you and so judging requires a measure of humility that we don't often, those are not questions we ask at confirmation hearings. We don't ask about humility, but you have to be willing to be taught. You have to be willing to know to learn what you don't know. Thurgood Marshall said when he went on the Supreme Court bench, he said not one of them knew anything about, he enjoyed saying the word Negro, but not one of them knew anything about black people before I got there. Not a one of them. What did they know? What experience had they had? So I think part of what makes the work really exciting is that I find it incredibly challenging intellectually, and I find it as the gateway into actually understanding this country.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And, you're here at a very special time. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary as an organization. And, but as you know, there are deeply embedded structural inequities in the DNA of our country. We think about mass incarceration, police brutality, racism, segregation, all of those things, and housing, and I would love for you to speak to that in terms of the inequities in housing.
Well, it's kind of interesting because there are, obviously, as you alluded to, many forms of discrimination and inequality in our country. Absolutely. Some of them are not visible to the naked eye, right? Some of them you see on occasions, right? If you come out on election day and you go into black communities in Houston or in Fulton County, Georgia, and you see lines that are extending blocks and blocks and blocks and people standing for hours, you have a sense that something's not quite, quite right. But there are many other forms of discrimination that, you can't necessarily see. If you come into a place of employment, you might wonder, hey, where are the women, or where are the black people, or where are the, but it's not usually that obvious. housing is the one area, I think, where America's problem of race is fully on display.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And the only reason that people, I think, don't think they see it is because we treat the physical landscape of our country as though it is inevitable. Black people live on the south side of Chicago, right? You know, the Upper East Side of New York is where the wealthy people live, or downtown is this or that. And we accept that in the landscape. We don't really ask questions about how that came to be. How did this particular community end up on this side of town or that side of town? We don't explore what lies beneath. Every place we are standing or sitting has a history, including the site of this hotel, I am sure. I haven't had a chance to research it, but I feel certain. So many communities have been cleared for projects that are deemed commercially profitable, for stadiums and concert halls, for highways that have been plowed through Black and brown communities, the interstate highway system that we all, you know, traverse. We know what the consequences of it has been for many Black communities around the country. Landmarks that we see, whether it's you know, the Black Hills of South Dakota, or it's the Arch in St. Louis. All of these places were cleared. And when we use that word clearing, we're talking about people and communities. You know, I say this all the time. I spend a lot of time in New York and near Lincoln Center. And, you know, Lincoln Center is beautiful. I don't know how many of you love, if you just walk up on that plaza, it's so gorgeous, especially at night. And extraordinary music and plays, ballet, philharmonic. But that was a neighborhood called San Juan Hill that was cleared to create Lincoln Center. You probably know the neighborhood because it's basically the neighborhood that West Side Story was based on. In other words, every place we are has a history. And the history is one that had consequences for people. And once we begin to peel that back, or once we begin to walk with the knowledge, you know that I've written quite a bit about lynching.
That's right.
You know, so I can't enter a town and see the cute little, you know, square outside the courthouse without having some sense of what may have or even likely happened there. So I think that having that third eye is very important to understanding that if we wish to see the consequences, the wages of segregation, it's right there for us to see. Of course, you can also see the socioeconomic condition of different communities, which also tells its own story. It tells a story about municipal services. It tells a story about access. We can note food deserts. It's all there on the landscape if we choose to see it. But if we take the position that, oh, that's a poor community, you know, as though poverty just came down from the sky and blanketed the community, then we will be able to have plausible deniability that we didn't know that these events happened, or the role of housing decisions and transportation decisions in creating and destroying the potential of a variety of communities. So I think the housing piece is so vitally important. When we think about segregation in our country and the visualization of segregation, we think about water fountains that say white and colored, or bathrooms that say white and colored. But when we see communities that are white and colored, we just make it like,
That's right.
that's just the way it is. That's the Black community. That's Harlem. That's Bed-Stuy. That's, you know, whatever, as though that is not in and of itself reflective of a message that is just as powerful as the ones that were affixed to those bathroom doors. So it's why I love to engage in housing work, and then having lived, years in Baltimore, I've just had the chance to see very close up and to care very deeply about what decisions about housing and transportation can mean to a kind of intermediate, struggling city. So I think it's just vitally important work.
Yeah, most definitely. And I know as you were speaking, I was just thinking about, it's even in like the language that we use when we talk about good neighborhoods and good schools. It's all of that, right? How we're socialized to think about it in that way.
Good. Yes, that's so true. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah. So if those are the good schools, and if that's the good neighborhood, then the other neighborhood's the bad neighborhood.
Yeah.
And how did that happen?
Absolutely.
Or is there just intrinsic badness and goodness in neighborhoods? That can't be.
That's right.
So it all should be provoking a set of questions for policymakers, for elected officials, and too often it doesn't. And I would love to see us challenge elected officials more. If you represent this particular district, this is your congressional district or your city council district, like you should know that history, And I'd love to see us challenging them more about like how did your district get to be your district in that way? Now I don't mean just the gerrymandered, nature of it and how political power is organized. I mean physically. Why does it look like that? Why is the park here and not there? Why is the shopping district here and not there? And I don't think we're asking enough of those questions.
That's right. Yeah, we definitely have to push and ask those questions. And so last week, and I think I mentioned this to you on the phone, we just released one of our signature publications called The Gap. And The Gap, really what it does is it focuses on the housing needs of households for extremely low income people, but it really just looks at whether or not there's an adequate supply. And we know there's not an adequate supply of affordable housing in any of the states. But what also the report found is that, Black, Latino, Indigenous households are disproportionately extremely low-income renters. And that they're disproportionately impacted by the shortage of housing as well. And so when we look at the numbers, and I'm just going to briefly share some of the numbers with you. So 19% of Black non-Latino households, 16% of American Indian or Alaska Native households, 13% of Latino households are extremely low-income renters. As compared to only 6% of white Latino households. So I'd like to get your perspective on how we got there.
just a few minutes. I guess I first want to just kind of unpack what it means to be an extremely low-income renter.
That's right.
And what goes along with that.
That's right.
Right? Because it's not just like my family has a low income and we rent, which is all those words would mean if we didn't know what else it meant, right? What it often means is that the home or apartment that you're renting is one that is not properly maintained by your landlord, that it may have unremitted lead paint, that it may have inadequate heat, that it may have inadequate or no air conditioning, which as we deal with the wages of climate change literally will become a life and death issue. It may have no public transportation readily available to it. There may be no supermarket with quality foods that is within walking distance, decent walking distance. The schools that your children are zoned to are schools that are inadequately funded because the property taxes that support that school are much lower than the property taxes that support schools in wealthier neighborhoods.
That's right.
It may be that the safety in your community is not up to par because although there are plenty of blue lights designed to surveil the community, there are not open spaces and lighting that is designed to deter crime. There are not sufficient jobs that are designed to give people hope and turn people away from criminality. There are not spaces and facilities where you can send your children and your teenagers to hang out in a safe environment. There is no pool in the summertime, and so folks are standing around on the stoop. That's what it means to be a low-income renter, okay? And it also means that if you, by chance, lose your job and you're not able to afford that rent, you can be evicted from that facility. You will be unable to afford counsel. You likely live in a jurisdiction that does not provide counsel. When you arrive at rent court, the landlord will have lots and lots of properties. He or she won't be there, but their representative will be there, trawling through the cases very quickly. You will not likely have an opportunity to be heard fully. And if you are heard, you will feel incredibly nervous and kind of not able to tell the whole story. And you may discover that you're unable to adequately represent yourself. And then if you are evicted, it may be that you live in a jurisdiction with the sheriff, whose job it is to evict people, does so in an inhumane way, places notices all throughout the building, knocks on doors, and when you are evicted, brings all of your things out onto the street and leaves them there.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So low-income renter doesn't really tell the story of the kind of precariousness, the kind of stress, the kind of isolation, the kind of challenges that are inherent in American poverty.
Yes.
We don't have a safety net
That's right.
that ensures those kinds of protections. We have no obligation or requirement of there being supermarkets within a certain population, in proximity to a certain population size. We do have disparate funding for our schools. We do know that there are two forms of policing that happen. Check the Department of Justice report on Baltimore that found these vast differences in how policing is managed in wealthy white communities in that city as opposed to poor black communities. So all of this is present.
Absolutely.
And to suggest that, this is just about people like making more money and pulling themselves up by their bootstraps against those odds, the odds I've just described, is outrageous. The obligation to ensure that there is safe, affordable housing of integrity for every American seems like the floor, the minimum for a healthy democracy. And we have really turned away from this in favor of unlimited development, in favor of projects that don't require developers to take account of the role that they are playing in those communities. I keep thinking about this, a simple requirement, a simple ordinance in every major city. Let's say Baltimore, Syracuse, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Rochester, just Pittsburgh, every city. And the ordinance would say that for any development in the city that would seek tax breaks or other city in-kind contributions, any development project over, you pick the number, 20 million, 5 million, I don't know what the number should be, that the development plan must include and must explain how the plan will support the creation of affordable housing and or promote integration, racial and socioeconomic integration in that city. Yeah. What if we just put that in? Now here's the thing. It doesn't even have a real enforcement mechanism. It is simply saying that if you want the project, you have to come forth with the plan.
That's right.
Right? It doesn't mean that we love the plan or we hate the plan or the plan's good enough or anything like that. But it begins to work on the psychology of development to suggest that you cannot build a stadium as though you're doing it in a vacuum. You know, I love the Ravens as much as the next guy. But if I'm going to go 10 blocks west, and I'm going to be in Sandtown, Winchester, and, you know, where Freddie Gray grew up, what is the connection between the two? So I think we really need to be thoughtful about, you know, everybody likes to have a nice stadium, everybody likes to have a nice concert hall. We all like these things. But there's a cost, and it seems to me to compel ordinary people to bear the cost without requiring those who are developing these projects. They're not developing these projects pro bono because they want to be nice guys. They expect to make a lot of money.
That's right.
And so why can't we compel them to have the obligation to think about that larger, you know, infrastructure that is around them? I just think we need to begin to get, to really get creative, because we're not going to stop development. But we have to compel development to be responsible.
That's right.
To be responsible.
That's right. So we have, thank you for that. So we have a few questions from the audience as well.
Okay.
So let me take a look at these questions. All right, so let's start with the first one. It's always good. So where are the places that the law can advance racial equity, and what issues can the law not influence?
Ooh. Well, that's a kind of trick question for a lawyer, but well, I just gave you an example, right, of where, you know, those of you who are organizers, you know, organizing around, you know, with your local city council persons to pass a citywide ordinance that would include a provision like this or one of your choice, you know, that would at least compel that so that that issue is constantly on the table. You know, for the most part, we hear about projects when they're already down the road.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's right.
So I think that's vitally important. I'm very appreciative of Transportation Secretary Buttigieg because, you know, I have worked on transportation issues, and I do believe that transportation is of a piece with housing and cannot be separated from it. And so I appreciate that when he was tapped to take on the role of Secretary of Transportation, that he reached out to try to get educated about that. And I also appreciate the Rebuilding Communities initiative that has been developed, although drastically underfunded, thank you, Joe Manchin, from what it needed to be, and Kristen Sinema, from what it needed to be. This is a nonpartisan event, I know, but it's just, it was them. I mean, I'm sorry. So, to really try and address the harm that was done by transportation siting decisions that fractured so many communities, you know, from North Carolina to Syracuse and you know, all in between and across the country. I think that's vitally important. I think a set of criteria around transportation decisions that are about equity, which I understand are being implemented, you know, is very important as well. I mean, how that decision-making happens. Yeah. But there's still so many knots in the system. You know, the most powerful example I can think of is what, again, happened in Baltimore when we were working to get a rapid transit system, which I believe in very much. I think it's very, very important. We finally were at the point where we were going to get a rapid transit system that would run through the Black community, would connect the Black community. We have a light rail system. The light rail is designed to take mostly people from the suburbs down to the stadiums, down to Camden Yards, the baseball stadium, and Raven Stadium. So we don't have, like many cities do, like we don't have like you have here in DC or in New York, a transportation system that's a kind of a hub that allows you to transfer and get around. We have a little line that goes from Charles Center downtown up to Hopkins and back. It's a straight line. I've never even heard such a thing, but it's a straight line. It's like not a hub. And so, so it's so embarrassing. You know, every time I come to DC, it's like there's a map that has like more stops that they're planning, you know, coming soon.
And a purple line.
Well, let's talk about the purple line. So we finally get this plan, and it's called, unfortunately, the Red Line. But that's the name. We should have known it was doomed. Anyway, the red line is going to run because the black community in Baltimore lives east to west.
Yes.
Right? So we're now going to have this, and this is incredibly important. I raised my kids on the west side of Baltimore, and, you know, it was very clear that, you know, even just for jobs, because our bus system is such a meandering bus system. I was told when I first moved to Baltimore that that's because the buses were created, they described it as the maid's route. That's what the buses were designed to do, was to get you to the big houses and park and so on. So in any case, just for kids going for summer jobs, you know, I grew up in New York where, you know, I lived in Queens, but I could have a summer job in Harlem because I could, you know, one token, I could get on a bus, I could get on 3 trains. You did.
That's
okay.
Right.
So, so I thought it was really important, and I also, I wrote about this a number of years ago, that I used to get up and do boot camp after I had my third child. And I remember being in my car, driving to the park for boot camp, and I would see at the bus stop, it was still dark, women who had on their nursing smocks and who were waiting for the bus, you know, to go to Hopkins, where there are jobs. Hopkins is all the way on the east side. I lived on the west side. And I would always think about what it means to go to your job in the dark. Yeah. What it means for your kids. Because I know what I went through with my kids to make sure what was in the book bag. Did they have their lunch? Did they have their homework?
That's right.
It means your kids are walking to the bus stop or to school by themselves, and so if they are being bullied, they're on their own.
That's right.
And you're going for your 12-hour shift, and then you're coming home, and it's not 3 o'clock, it's late. It's you're working 7 to 7, and you've got the meandering bus. By the time you get home, your kids have been home for a while. I thought about the kid going to school without the mom to do all that checking that we have to do. And the teacher says, well, you didn't bring your homework and you didn't bring this, and the teacher's annoyed with the child.
Right.
Or what is our expectation when that mom comes home, that she should read to them? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And make sure they have a balanced meal, and give them a bath, and maybe read them a story before they go to sleep. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah. We just had a really interesting conversation upstairs with tenant leaders, and it really touched on what you were just saying in terms of just when, you know, in going to community meetings or, you know, events, not even events, what are they called, like town hall meetings with their county government, city government, that these things are happening at a time in the day where, you know, tenants are just coming home from work, you know, their children are at home, so you wait, you put off cooking for your child, helping with homework to go to these meetings, and so it's really thinking about, like,
we don't think about the lives, the lives of people. And even worse, in a way, it's like, you know, the piece I wrote was about, it was one of those books that came out with Lean In, or, you know, one of those ones where, you know, a very accomplished white lady talks about how women have to be more, I mean this, women have to be more ambitious, and, you know, and so I ended up writing this piece about those women at the bus stop, because I thought, what do you know about her ambition? Maybe she does want to go back to school, you know? Maybe she's working as an LPM, she wants to be an RN. Like, what do you know of her ambition, and what decisions have you made as a well-heeled, educated white woman that would help the life of that woman? What decisions are you making about public transportation? Or are you one of the people saying, we don't, as we had in certain neighborhoods in Maryland, we don't want the stop in our neighborhood? Which one are you? Like, are you helping? Because they have ambition too. Just because they're standing on a bus stop at 6 in the morning doesn't mean that they're not ambitious. And you're in the boardroom, you know? I'm not sure, to answer that second question, whether how the law deals with that, deals with the deeply embedded stereotypes that we have about people that allow us to suggest that people live in ways that are how they should live.
That's right.
You know, that's part of it. Part of it is just like America's created on this idea that some people are going to get it and some people ain't going to get it. And your job is to be one of the people who get it.
That's right.
And I would hope at this moment, when we are in full-on democratic crisis, that we would understand that that is not working. That is not working. That we have to have a minimum way in which we hold one another to a standard of decency that allow us to live humanely and allow us to be the citizens that we need for this country to be not in peril.
Yes.
So I do think that, but I do believe in law and policy, because law and policy are the building blocks. They're how we reflect what our values are. And people who say, I don't pay attention to that stuff, yes, you do, because either you're benefiting from it, or you're a bystander, or you're getting in your car and you're driving to work, on a highway paved over somebody's neighborhood, on a highway that was created. So now let me finish with the red line. So the red line, the red line's going to go east to west, and there's plans, and we're excited. This is 2015? No, 2016. And, we're raring to go. This is in the last year of the Obama administration. The Secretary of Transportation is Anthony Fox. We're ready. Maryland has put in about $350,000 just to the studying and the materials preparing for it. There are a lot of community groups really beginning to address the issue, because we want to make sure there's buy-in. And a lot of Black people are like, what, where? Yeah. Why? Our neighborhood, there's concern. We need to address so all that's happening. The Department of Transportation is holding $1 billion. I didn't say $1 million. I said $1 billion for the creation of the Red Line. We're excited. Freddie Gray is killed in the custody of Baltimore City police officers. His voice box is crushed. His spine, when the EMTs pull him out of the van, they said feels like a handful of rocks. The neighborhood, a part of West Baltimore where he lives, because it's definitely not the whole city, erupts in protest and unrest. And of course, this comes within a period of time in which we are seeing police violence against unarmed Black people over and over again. And it's a big issue for Baltimore, and the nation's eyes are on the city and so forth. And we're all protesting. And it's an interesting situation in Baltimore, because again, we have a Democratic mayor, we have a Republican governor, but they are both, they both come into the neighborhood and are trying to address the issues of unrest. And the thread is being pulled, and we're talking a lot about the socioeconomic conditions in Baltimore. I am posing the question over and over again, but what was the life Freddie Gray was going to have if he lived? He had been severely lead poisoned as a child, him and his twin sister, Frederica. He was not literate. He had been represented and gotten a settlement that had then been basically built by a kind of a scheme of attorneys who take people's settlement. So, I felt like we should be answering those questions. It's not enough to just care about this young man being killed, but what was where was he going to live? If he was selling drugs, what job was available for Freddie Gray, right, who, with his, mental challenges because of lead poisoning and so on and so forth. So we were really beginning to get the issues. A couple months later, this is in the spring, I want to say maybe June, with the stroke of a pen, our governor cancels the Red Line and decides that the Red Line is a boondoggle, it's too expensive, and instead we should take that money and put it towards the Purple Line.
Purple Line. Yep.
And when he's challenged, he says, we just spent $100 million on the riots.
Wow. Oh.
So at that time, I'm leading the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Later that year, we file a civil rights complaint, a Title VI complaint about the decision. And we go into the history of transportation in Baltimore. We demonstrate that there was a plan, in the 1960s to create that hub, that circle that most transportation systems look. We talk about all the community resistance, particularly from white communities that did not want stations in their communities, and who feared that people from the city would and crime would come to their communities. So we filed that complaint. It's being investigated, and then of course we have the election, and we have a new administration, the Trump administration in 2017, which closes the case.
Yep.
And that's the reason why we don't have an east-west transit right now. Now, fortunately, Governor Wes Moore has revived the plan for the Red Line, and so we're hopeful. But I just want you to think about what that means. Years of planning. What state officer turns away $1 billion in federal money? Chris Christie.
Right.
Okay. just saying, right? So when I say, so that even when you have navigated all the stuff and gotten the appropriation and gotten yourself to that point, like, you still have that kind of political arrogance, you know, that can snatch victory, defeat from the jaws of victory, right? So I just think it's a very, very challenging thing. And I would say, you know, and I've written about this in my book, that because we have tainted and racialized the word public. So if I say public transportation, what's the image in your mind? If I say public housing, what's the image in your mind, even though public housing was originally built for white people in this country? If I say public schools, we have so racialized the word public that the mere allocation of resources to build public infrastructure is seen in racial terms. We have created a circumstance in which we lionize that which is private. That's why everybody wants to get in their private car and drive to work. They want to send their children to private schools. Everyone wants their own private home. This is not how it is in other Western democracies.
Absolutely.
There is an understanding that the health of a democracy is undergirded by public goods. And we have lost that.
That's right.
We have lost the understanding of what public parks mean, of what public spaces mean, of how no democracy can be healthy without strong public schools, that public housing is a necessity and always has been, in order to bridge people or to allow people to have a place to live in community that has a standard.
That's right.
So I think the part that law can't do is the part that I work on, which is, you know, and that we must recognize, is that racism is literally a democracy killer. It is not. It is not about your feelings. It is not about whether you see race. It's not about whether you have a racist bone in your body. It is that the lens of race that we have now sifted through these other words, right? Like tax cuts and, you know, this is how we talk about race now, right? We talk about race as taxes. We talk about it as public housing and public transportation. We talk about it in these ways, right? And so you think that you're not engaging in racialized politics or policy, but we are all the time. And we've just assigned this different lexicon to it. But it is actually breaking our democracy. The decisions we are making as a result of deeply embedded racism and white supremacist ideology are breaking our democracy. They're making our democracy unsustainable. And unless we are prepared to confront this, and this is why I'm writing this book called Is This America? Unless we are prepared to confront this and have the courage to overcome it. When I say overcome, I don't mean we're going to overcome racism. I don't mean we're going to end racism tomorrow. I don't mean we're going to get reparations going in a day. I mean that as a democracy that is hopefully coming to some level of maturity, we have to be able to see what our faults are. We have to be able to see what our weaknesses are, and we have to be able to create an infrastructure, a policy and legal infrastructure that protects against our weaknesses. That's what civil rights laws do. They don't say, oh, we're all colorblind. They say, we've got this weakness because of our history, and so we're going to put these safeguards in place to protect against that weakness. That's what grown-up democracies do.
That's right.
But what we now want to do is tell ourselves fairy stories and suggest that if people just work really hard, that, you know, it will all come to them, and it's just those people who are lazy and those people who don't want to work, and it's just those migrants, as though our economy could even survive without migrants. So I would say that the part that law cannot fix is our democratic immaturity. You know, and my hope, what I see as the opportunity of this moment, is that because we have reached a point of calamity, in my view, You can check in with me in a year. But because we have reached a point of calamity, when, by the way, regardless of how this year's election comes out, we will still be at a time of calamity.
Yes.
Because of all the things I'm saying.
Yes.
You know, until we're prepared to deal with that, I don't think we can solve these major problems. I am sympathetic to this country because it's my country, and because I think this country is trying to do something that no other country has done. We're trying to create this vibrant, multiracial democracy where equality and opportunity and justice are the touchstones. Like, at least post-Civil War, that's the story of our that we're trying to create. We're doing it over a vast landmass, right? From end to end, it could fit a bunch of countries in it, right? We're Europe, but one country. And we're trying to do this thing where we hold one another together, and where we hold this thing together as a country. And it's not easy. So I am sympathetic to the project, but it doesn't get easier because we tell ourselves fairy stories. So if we could grow up a little bit and understand that this deeply embedded problem is not bad for just Black people and Latino people and LGBTQ people, that it will kill our democracy unless we get hold of it.
Yes.
So we are going to let that be the final word. And we thank you immensely for being with us on our 50th anniversary.
Thanks so much. Don't give up hope.